happy, beautiful, amazing evening, all. And Carol, thank you always for running the chat room, the Zoom, letting people in, and just being an amazing, wonderful, epic human. So tonight we're going to talk about stress. And as Carol mentioned, 31 years now in clinical practice and plenty of experience with world-class athletes. And yeah, their stress is super high. And then the other end of the spectrum, people that have been sent home to die. And yeah, guess what? Their stress is pretty high too. So one of my passions is knowledge and information and sharing, and certainly putting together information that can add value to people in their lives and our world. So let's dive into our amazing topic. So when we start looking at stress, this is probably the most cited word in all of the medical literature. You look at this and, millions, literally millions of PubMed citations. Why? Probably because it does more to disrupt wellness than anything and maybe everything else simultaneously. So I taught a full day series on stress with Dr. Jeff Bland a couple of decades ago. And, he is considered the father of functional medicine. And I love the way he summarized some of the effects of stress in what he wrote here. So I'm going to share this with you. And it's probably about one of the few things I'll read to you. But here's what he said. With prolonged stress from multiple sources, the stress response can be as damaging as the stressors themselves. And in fact, I'll suggest more damaging, because guess what? Whatever damage is going to happen with what's going on in your life, it happens and it's gone. But the stress response is something that we keep fueling over time. So how are we damaged? Well, that depends on our genetic vulnerabilities. One thing that tends to consistently happen is people become insulin resistant. That means it takes more insulin to get the job done, which is prediabetes. That can lead to diabetes. And I was taught years ago, friends do not let friends become diabetic, because it's one of the worst things that can happen. Your body will slowly destroy itself. Notice it says recovery after injury or illness decreases. You don't repair your body when you're in a chronic stress mode. Libido and reproductive function are adversely affected. And in fact, that's, pandemic. That's one of the real pandemics, is people being infertile. Stress, a big player, toxins, other things as well. Muscles start to lose their tone. And in fact, they actually break down. And it says the body becomes fatter as the individual develops an apple shape. So that's that central obesity, that big belly fat, which has also been called angry fat. Blood cholesterol, triglycerides, and blood pressure all increase. That certainly sets you up for cardiovascular challenges. Fatigue sets in and sleep is restless. So I have a little extra section on sleep, because sleep is one of the most powerful things that we can do for our entire health and wellness, and one of the best ways to break the stress cycle. The person's mood slips towards depression, and that's because of altered brain chemistry. Inflammatory conditions increase. We're going to address that as well. Immune defense against common infections like cold and flu decrease. Energy and enthusiasm for life are lost. I was at a weekend seminar on stress years ago, and there was an Indian researcher that made a very powerful statement. He said, you know what? If I could put a curse on anybody, it would be that may their cortisol always be high. And we're going to find out that that's basically the curse of humanity now. Most people are having elevated cortisol. Keep in mind that I haven't found an updated publication. This was even before the pandemic, but 3 out of 4 medical visits are in some form related to stress. And most people would argue that the last few years have been the most stressful on the planet. But go back now, tens of thousands of years ago, and when they found skulls where there was evidence of the teeth being ground, that's a classic stress response. They can estimate the bone health, and they estimate that the individuals that were grinding their teeth at night died more than 15 years earlier. So that's a pretty powerful statement. And by the way, I often share these PubMed citations. If you were to actually type this into your Google search bar, you could go to the National Library of Medicine, National Institutes of Health database, and you would find out that nearly everyone is stuck in chronic stress, which creates what's called cortisol resistance. The body does not respond to cortisol as well, and therefore cortisol stays high. So notice this vicious feed forward phenomena. Stress leads to elevated cortisol, especially at night. That causes problems with sleep. When you don't get good sleep, you're more prone to daily stress. That's going to release more cortisol. That causes more sleep problems. So you get into this very destructive loop for your health. And then some references on that. If you're a poor sleeper, stress is already harder on you to begin with. And there's a lot of technical language here, but very simply, what I'll tell you is that when you have sleep challenges, you will disrupt your ability to buffer the stress. That'll keep your stress hormones high. That's where it says high cortisol. That will create increased insulin and glucose, which is the perfect storm for elevated body fat. And the decreased adiponectin is something that is responsible for controlling appetite. So the perfect storm for becoming obese and making bad choices and really having a bad life is high stress and poor sleep. So this book is really a masterpiece. Matthew Walker, PhD researcher, teaches at Stanford. This is a phenomenal, extreme, more than PhD dissertation on the importance of sleep. And I'm going to share several quotes from his book. So the first thing he says is, the shorter your sleep, the shorter your life. That is a published medical fact. Heart disease, obesity, dementia, the loss of your mind prematurely, diabetes, and cancer all have direct causal links to lack of sleep. Powerful quote here as well. The physical and mental impairments caused by just one night of bad sleep dwarf those caused by an equivalent absence of food or exercise. So we used to think that there was three pillars to health: diet, exercise, and sleep. But Matthew Walker goes on to say that sleep really is the foundation of it all. It deserves its own base in health. And notice this quote: the best bridge between despair and hope is a good night's sleep. So let's treat ourselves to that. Powerful quote here: exhaustion is going to make wimps out of all of us. So, my way of thinking of that S on Superman's chest, that means he got a good night's sleep. And whether it's Superman or Superwoman, we certainly all do better with a good night's sleep. Better sleep, better night. So my mentors taught years ago that a great day starts the night before. So a good sleep routine, wind down, get great sleep, then you're going to have a great day. That'll lead to another great night. And we get into that feed forward phenomena. Simon Sinek, one of the most popular TED Talks of all time, start with why. And why do we sleep? Because if we don't, we're going to die early. Simple fact. It'll put the brakes on stress. I'll talk about other ways of putting the brakes on stress first. But there's a different way of looking at why when it comes to sleep. And you want to have more reasons to wake up and create a beautiful life for you and those you love than reasons to stay awake. So generally speaking, most of the time when people are staying up late at night, it's more or less mindless entertainment. So Tom Rath, his first book is called Eat, Move, Sleep. And he's a fascinating story. I probably shared his picture before, but at age 15, he lost an eyeball to cancer. And they said, you know what, you lost a genetic lottery. You have a rare genetic defect. We don't recommend you ever get married or have kids. And by the way, you will never see your 35th birthday. That's what they told him. Well, if I showed a picture of Tom Rath, he's 45 years old, absolutely amazing. He's written about 10 different books. I think he's Amazon.com's best-selling author. But he wrote this book, Are You Fully Charged? And the way that he fully charges himself is by getting a really good night's sleep. And one of the things that he'll tell you is he figured out for him, he needs to budget 10 hours to get 8 reasonable hours of sleep. And he also eats right for him and moves right for himself. And not only will poor sleep shorten your life, but it certainly decreases the quality of your life. So when you start looking at these health problems associated with poor sleep, it's not even an exhaustive list. So notice the summary at the bottom. Without adequate sleep, you get fat, sick, and stupid, and you will die early and be miserable along the way. So, why don't we make that a priority? I'm going to suggest that, when we learn more about the reasons why, maybe we'll make it more of a priority. So all of these technical terms on the left talk about how and why loss of sleep leads to an increased risk of obesity. Your stress hormones will be high, your thyroid hormone will be impressed, insulin will be opposed. You tend to have cravings for unhealthy foods, which you think are good for as a stress reset, but they're not satisfying, they're not nourishing, they don't give you what you need. And the more bad food you eat, the more you tend to crave bad food. So it's a very vicious cycle. And I like this, that the cdc.gov, and this was probably published, I guess it was 2013. CDC was a lot more credible back then, but they wanted to raise awareness of sleep as a healthy behavior, and then look at their top 10 lists: better immune system, better memory, better body composition, better sex drive, better fertility, better longevity, less probability of diabetes, healthy growth and development. Why, by the way, do kids sleep so much? Because their brain is growing like crazy, because their body's growing like crazy. It's good for your mood and well-being, and certainly heart healthy as well. So what we know is that when people have poor sleep, their brain actually becomes disrupted and even degenerates. But even a single night of sleep leads to poorer cognitive performance. So interesting study on Army people, military. They basically found out that when people were deprived of 6 hours of sleep for more than 6 straight nights, they actually functioned as if they were legally drunk. My comment on that is we really don't want drunks running around with high-powered weapons. Simple statement: neither diet nor exercise can replace the need for sleep. And maybe we ought to, again, just draw that out again, where sleep is the entire foundation of wellness. Think about certain parts of the world where they have persistent darkness, like Alaska, probably the far north of Canada. I don't know how many people live there, but Sweden, for instance, 40 straight days of darkness. So you might ask, well, why in the world then, would we rely on light to be our primary indicator of our circadian rhythm? And it turns out that light is one of them, but movement is really the primary indicator. And light has a huge impact on melatonin. One of the absolute worst things for melatonin is blue light. And that's what most people have coming out of their screens. I actually have a blue light protector on my computer screen as well as my smartphone. And I broke my blue blocker glasses, so I've got to get another pair. I used them so much that I misplaced them, sat on them one time, and so long blue blockers, but I'll get another set. But that blue light is really bad for melatonin. And we're going to find out that melatonin is not only important for sleep, but it's important for a lot of different things in our body, including buffering stress. So over the last decade or so, there's been an emerging body of research on melatonin. It turns out that even single-celled organisms make melatonin. It's universal in the biologic systems. And this was an article about the 10 hallmarks of cancer. And very, very simply, melatonin prevents cancer by at least 10 proven mechanisms. When we have that blue light, we're going to inhibit melatonin, and we're actually going to elevate cortisol, which can be a problem for so many different people. So some of my students that prefer to watch these live or replays like the biochemical pathways. And I tell people, I can't even imagine how many PhD researchers put in, how many man years to create this phenomenal biochemical chart. But we make both serotonin and melatonin from tryptophan, which is an essential amino acid. But when the body's under high stress, which is going to increase cortisol, or inflamed, and by the way, if you have too much cortisol for too long, you're progressively inflamed, you will actually drive an excitatory neurotransmitter called glutamate, which will actually increase stress and increase the inflammatory process. So I've made this statement for years: if you're not running on rest and recovery, you're running on stress hormones. So the top enemies: artificial light, toxins, inflammatory process, chronic illness, all of these things are going to interfere with sleep. And by the way, including distress. So if we start looking at our brain on stress, when we're at rest and everything is good, our brain gets more blood flow by unit volume than any other organ of the body. So, it represents 2% of the body mass, but uses 20% of the body oxygen. But yet, when we are stressed, we shut off the blood flow to a high portion of the brain. That would be the higher thought centers and even the joy centers. And we start running on reflex responses. So when we start talking about stress, elevated cortisol, which of course sleep deprivation will cause that, super powerful correlation between elevated cortisol and depression. And there was a quote published years ago that said, there's a universal agreement that 50 to 75% of all depression is induced by chronic stress. Depression is suggested to be the #1 cause of disability around the world. And notice what this PubMed study says, and it's often fatal. Why? You don't take care of yourself, you may not sleep well, you're more prone to an accident. There's that horrible possibility of suicide. All of those things can happen. When we have too much stress for too long, we get stress resistance or cortisol resistance. That creates chronic inflammation. The body burns up and the immune system is shut down. And we have known for more than 50 years that when people are under stress, that their immune system is suppressed. So, one of the things that they would classically study is medical students during their final exam week, because most of them were stress deprived. And by the way, most of them would get very sick. So that was one of the things that led to that. But one of the cells, or the cell that's most suppressed by stress, is called the natural killer cell. And that is what the immune system uses to kill both cancer cells and viral infected cells. So we're prone to cancer and viruses when we're under stress. We already mentioned how stress can make you fat. Multiple mechanisms. They probably haven't even identified all of them already, but it's just not good for you. It breaks down lean, it increases fat by multiple mechanisms, and it also leads to what I call discomfort eating. They used to call them comfort foods, but no, definitely not. They're discomfort foods. You get a little sugar high, which is very, very temporary, but yet you really disrupt your chemistry and wellness, and it leads to obesity and ill health. And here's quite simply what they found. If you do that discomfort eating, it doesn't really do anything to help you to recover from the distress. So I mentioned melatonin. It's a very, very powerful calming agent to the adrenal glands. And what we know now is it actually binds both acute or buffers both acute and chronic stress. And it's worth repeating that melatonin is a powerful anti-cancer agent. I will often have people take melatonin, and I'll share also theanine and Ganoderma spores every waking hour. And sometimes people wonder, is this going to be toxic? And so absolutely not. They've done animal studies where they literally infused half the body weight of the animal directly into their bloodstream of melatonin, over 24-hour periods for days on end or weeks on end without toxic effects. So this is profoundly safe. Theanine is an amino acid found in green tea. It produces good quality sleep and buffers anxiety. But the interesting thing about theanine is it calms anxiety without producing drowsiness. And it does that by naturally increasing GABA, which is the most calming chemical in the central nervous system. And then there's Ganoderma, also known as Reishi, called the herb of spiritual potency. And we just found out very, very recently, a few months ago, May 2022, finally they did a study. They know it's very, very calming. It drives the parasympathetic nervous system. It's a GABA facilitator in the brain, but it also lowers the amount of stress hormones in the bloodstream. So it's powerful as an antidepressant. It helps serotonin. It's good for anxiety. It's a GABA facilitator, and literally has hundreds, if not thousands, of other health benefits. Interestingly enough, one of my wonderful students and business partners in Sweden decided to combine the melatonin and theanine and other things into a single dropper, and the Ganoderma spores work well. And now these are available for pre-order if someone wants to give that a shot from Dream Coast. But that transitions us now to questions and answers.
Awesome. Just before I get started with the questions, one they're all going to ask is how can they get those drops if that's something that they wanted?
I think it's called dreamcoast.se. So let me share the screen again. And let's see where we were, back a slide. So, well, type in Dream Coast stress drops, or maybe I can do that and type it in the chat, but they can be pre-ordered. So I'll look for that and I'll see if I can put that in the chat.
Okay, great. All right. What's someone do if there's a constant decrease in appetite for a person?
Constant decrease? Is that the answer? Not increase, but decrease?
Decrease.
We want to figure out what's causing that. And so usually there's something profoundly wrong with the person. I don't want to throw out a very, very negative diagnosis, but there is a very negative and very concerning diagnosis called cancer that people can get that has been known to decrease appetite. But interestingly enough, like in Canada, for instance, cannabis is legal in all forms of it. And one thing that's known is that is an actual appetite stimulant. They use that on cancer patients, good for pain control. And here's one of the things that I'll tell you. I actually did a research project on cannabis and coffee, and I listened to 2 full audiobooks. And my background with cannabis, I grew up in the Midwest, very conservative family. The only thing you knew about cannabis was you just stayed away from it. And if you were aware of anybody doing that, you might consider reporting them because it was considered very, very criminal. But interestingly enough, Governor Jesse Ventura, and he was a governor of Minnesota, and he's a real patriot, but his wife had a severe seizure disorder and multiple convulsive seizures multiple times a day, and it was going to kill her. And finally, someone said, well, Jesse, why don't you try some cannabis? So he flew her to Colorado, got her some legal medical cannabis, and in the very first dose, the seizures stopped, and she was able to get off of all medications and resume her life. So he wrote something called the Marijuana Manifesto. And people that are in the know, and I wasn't, now I'm more so, realized that it was tainted money and really criminals supporting what are called legal drugs to make cannabis a top superfood with profound medicinal benefits known for thousands of years illegal. The war on cannabis was one of the early starts of the total war on health. I also listened to the audiobook, The Marijuana Manifesto, and this was maybe Jesse's was cannabis and the other was the Marijuana Manifesto, one or the other, but I listened to both those books. And this guy had a severe untreatable cancer that is alive 30 years later. And his doctors acknowledged that cannabis was the cure. So what am I recommending here? If it's legal, maybe try some, but we have to figure out what's causing the problem. Make sure you don't have something serious going on. Go to a good quality functional medicine practitioner that can look at you. And if there's nothing major, well, then let's consider some legal cannabis, legal, clean, good cannabis. I see my amazing friend Nandor, who probably knows plenty of things about plenty, but since he raised his hand, I figure it's timely to call on him. So happy, beautiful, amazing humans, amazing human.
There we go. I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me, Dr. Bob?
Loud and clear. You're looking good as ever, my friend.
Oh, thank you so much. So you, as always, everybody, hello, welcome, or hello. Thank you for this wonderful session today. As always, Dr. Bob. My question is about the vagus nerve. Okay. As you was speaking about the adrenals and so on and so forth, and melatonin and theanine and now cannabis, what I found apparently that is really beneficial, I've been doing it, in addition to cold showers and cold plunges, is ice packs on the chest. It's great for improving the vagal tone, but I would think that many people have a problem, whether it be subclinical or clinical, with their vagus nerve. Dr. Bob?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And so there's some kind of joke about what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but we're talking about a different Vegas here. And so it's, the real driver of the parasympathetic nervous system, the vagus nerve, is absolutely critical for rest, digestion, recovery, procreation, immune function, all of this absolute great stuff. It's amazing that they find more and more and more about cold therapy, which I'm a huge fan of as well. Now, living in Houston, Texas, some people might say I never do a cold plunge, but I swim every day of the year. Coldest my water ever got was 37, so that's maybe +2 or 3 on the Celsius scale. And it's indisputable now that cold is really, really good for a lot of different reasons. But one, you're so good at researching things, how powerful that you've come up with that. And if people are willing to tough it out, I would imagine there's a few minutes of discomfort, and then after you're done, it's probably some level of blissful relaxation. Because if you get that vagus working right, everything that you want to keep yourself happy and healthy will be stimulated. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. So the ice pack on the chest, it's it's a little easier than a 15-minute cold shower or a cold plunge. It's just 15 minutes on the chest. Before bed is a great time to do it, again, because of the vagus nerve. And if you need to do it more often than once a day, it's great.
Well, there's also emerging research, and I just saw YouTube on it the other day, so I didn't follow up with the digging that I typically do. But now they're finding it doesn't take 15 minutes. Interestingly enough of the shock, and they're recommending contrast shock. So like when people used to get super warm in a sauna, and then either jump in ice water or in a snowbank, they say that quick shock with rapid transition is enough to drive the healing benefits. 15 minutes is probably better, much less doable, but even the simple shock starts moving us in that direction.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Bob.
Thank you always, Nandor.
Thank you. What are reasons someone is chronically fatigued or has low energy every time they move?
Well, that's basically called exercise intolerance. The body's pretty beat down. So we know that life is motion and we need to move, but people need to move in a way that honors their body. So I have a fun video that I don't think maybe I'll be able to play it. Sometimes it doesn't go well on Zoom. I have a patient, this was years ago, and it was so fun to videotape her. And let me copy all 3 of these and put it in. And I'll see if I can play it. And then Carol, I'm gonna ask you for a thumbs up. I'll see if I can keep watching you while I'm playing this, because I want to make sure that people can get the audio and everything else. So this fun patient, Pat Odom, I actually filmed her on day 1 that she was in my office, and she was a diabetic and had a cardiac issues and was taking 8 different medications. I have a video release from her to tell her story, but literally within 1 week, she was diabetic, out of control, on medication, to within a week, no diabetes, perfect sugar, no medication. And how did she do it? I told her, I said, Pat, you need to exercise, every waking hour. And she said, you don't know what you're asking. I can't even walk across the room. And I said, that's not what I'm asking you to do. She says, what are you asking me to do? I said, I need you to squeeze your muscles. So, Brendan Coates were on here, or Brandon could, or Nandor could, but I had her squeeze everything that she had, from head to toe. If she could flex her earlobes, I wanted her to do it. I wanted to squeeze her glutes, her quads, her calves, her hamstrings, her abs, her pecs, everything that she owned. And I wanted her to do that, for 3 minutes, if possible, every waking hour. And what happened was, when you contract muscles strongly, you actually drive sugar into the cell independent of insulin. And that's a big part of how she was able to make such dramatic changes. And when I filmed her, when we had her off of all medications completely, so the first 2 weeks she got off of diabetic medications her first week, and with 8 months she was off of 6 cardiac medications. And I said, Pat, tell me about your journey. She says, a year ago I couldn't walk across the room. I was afraid to go to sleep because I didn't think I'd wake up. And so if someone's fatigued every time they move, well, let's start with isometric contractions. and grow from there. The answer is not to move, but the answer is to get healthy. And the big four: stress with stress reset, toxins, do a detox with, some really good medical foods. Malnutrition is a factor in that. And so we want to alkalize the body with an anti-inflammatory diet. And I'll give a big shout out. I don't know if it was Nandor or Brendan Coates that introduced me to the carnivore diet, but this is a remarkable advancement in human nutrition, where there's a lot of people that do extremely well with just meat. You look at people like Jordan Peterson, only red meat and salt now for years on end. And the reason is their gut is so bad, and their bugs in their gut are so bad that plants feed bad bugs that eat them, and they create horrible toxins that are inflammatory and disruptive to health. So start moving, start with isometric contractions, move what you can, always nourish your body, de-stress your body, detoxify your body, and find someone that, if you're really struggling, that you can work with directly, to monitor your progress and help you along.
Perfect. Next question. What are the effects of listening to and watching overly loud videos, whether they are mentally stimulating or not?
I'm going to go back to an old quote. Everything's a toxin. It's only a matter of dose. So if you're doing too much of it, they're even describing something called digital dementia, where you spend too much time with screens. You didn't mention the watching aspect of it, but the listening aspect of it. And quite simply, if you start to put too much, too loud into your head, your body's going to start dampening it out. Now, could that ultimately lead to hearing loss? Well, it's proven that it can. You got to get pretty loud for that. But my question might be, why would you do it overly loud? You want to have it loud enough so that you can hear it. That's fine. And maybe I'm wired differently, but I've never been a fan of loud. Some people are. I think Claudio's a little bit of a sound expert. I've seen him have expertise in different speakers and things like that. So maybe he has some insight as to why people might enjoy loud. But too much of anything is not good, and loud is, by my definition, too much sound.
Okay. Next question. What is more important, quality of sleep or duration?
Oh boy. You've stumped me on that, because I would think that you got to have both, quite simply. So if you got 10 hours of absolutely miserable sleep, you're not going to reset your brain. If you only got 4 hours of good sleep, you're not going to reset your body. So I don't know that we can separate them, but I'll dig into that. I'll actually look into that for next week.
Perfect. Do blue block glasses have to have a tint to be most effective?
Well, I mean, if they're certified blue block, they would have some tint to them. So they would be blocking the blue light, and that's the key. So I'm not sure I understand the question, but blue blockers by definition block the blue hues. And there's different, when I bought my 3 sets of glasses, I got yellow, I got orange, and I got red. And it was just a different degree of how much blue they'd block, with the red being most extreme. And therefore, I guess the shading would matter to a certain degree, but blue blockers could be good.
I'm sorry. Why I asked that question was because when I go to my optometrist and I ask him for glasses that do blue block, the ones I got are completely just clear, and he says it's the same, but I still feel stress, I think, in my eyes, and I'm just kind of curious.
Well, maybe he's aware of a technology that I'm not. And as an optometrist, I would think that he'd be more in the know with that, Jeff. But, everything, Ralph Waldo Emerson said this, life is a series of experiments, the more the better. And you try something, if it works for you, you continue. If it doesn't work for you, you make a change. And so, you could probably put some, shades over the top of that. They have different filters, whether it's yellow, orange, or red, and see if you feel better with that. But, ultimately, what we're all looking for is the result we want. So if you're not getting what you need, then I would make a change until you find what works for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, next. With gastric bypass, the vagus nerve absolutely gets cut. How does that affect stress in the body?
Well, they're not going to cut the vagus nerve without killing you, but they're going to disrupt branches of it. And what they do, and I've done several talks on gastric bypass, and this is a barbaric procedure. And even just this week, I looked up, weight loss 2022 medical interventions. And the only approved medical intervention for weight loss is gastric bypass. And the medical folks are still saying that weight loss is too complex, for us to figure out. And plenty of comedians have just, had a field day with that. Really, doctors, you can't figure out weight loss. Now, is it true that it's only food choices and exercise? No, there's a lot of metabolic factors. There's stress factors. There's insulin factors. There's food quality factors. There's food timing factors. Sleep is a factor. Satiety is a factor. There's so many different things. But the bottom line is, if you make all really good food choices and you address the microbiome and you buffer the stress and you clear the toxins and you move your body and you get good sleep, I have not yet seen a patient in 31 years that didn't start losing weight on that. Now, some people are metabolically very, very stuck. And I tell people it's easier to stay out of trouble than get out of trouble. But just the fact that gastric bypass works, how does it work? They dramatically reduce the amount of food that's absorbed in the system. And with gastric bypass, if they have carbohydrates, they develop something called a dumping syndrome, where they'll get diarrhea and it'll go out of their system really fast. So they have to eat a ketogenic diet. But I did a Facebook Live with the first time I saw this patient, he was 541 pounds. I couldn't weigh him in my office. So he would go and to a special scale and weigh before he came in. And I do things to assess body composition. My software for bioimpedance analysis won't even assess accurately. It doesn't accept anybody over 450 pounds, but he's approaching that 450-pound mark. I put him on a stress reset. I put him on a detox for 10 days. And when he came in, I think he only lost 9 pounds, so that's not a huge difference in that period of time. But I asked him, I said, if 0 is no change and 100 is perfect ideal, how much better do you feel? And he said 80% better. And I had to step back and say, wait a minute, how is it that you feel 80% better? He says, oh my gosh, you don't understand. My knees hurt so bad. I couldn't get out of a chair. I couldn't walk. He says, my knees feel great. Well, it wasn't the fat loss that did it in his case. It was the stress reset, the anti-inflammation, the resetting of the gut microbiome. All of that is so critical. He was in today and doing a lot better as well. And I asked him his weight. He says, I wasn't able to weigh before getting here. But I'm guesstimating he's probably down 40 to 50 pounds already. And he feels like he's got a new lease on life because he can see, wait a minute, there's something that works. And he would have said before coming to me, nothing works. Well, no, nothing you've tried works. That doesn't mean that nothing works. So gastric bypass, brutal. Do they damage the vagus nerve? Absolutely. Could they cut it? Not without killing you. The vagus is life critical. So they cut it to a certain part of the stomach, but there's so many different branches to it.
Sorry, Dr. Bob, do you have him on carnivore?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I would love to see this gentleman drop from 500 and change down to, where did you want him to be? 200, 180, 220?
180 would probably be a moonshot, but, let's put it this way. He gets below 400. He gets below 500. He's going to be ecstatic. Then we're going to get below 4, then 3, then 2. And as long as he's willing to stick it out, you bet. Yeah.
And Dr. Bob, how's he enjoying carnivore? Because I know there's always resistance with carnivore from person to person.
He's struggling with it, and so we're kind of negotiating where, I want him to do 4 days carnivore for sure every week, and then keto with healthy plants in between. And then we're going to see how his body comp is affected. But, telling someone, okay, never meet again until you're 180 pounds, probably not. But that's the art of patient management, right? So right now we've negotiated 4 days on, 3 days off.
Right. Okay.
Well, but we
Cool.
didn't start carnivore though. Interestingly enough, when we did the stress reset, the detox, the anti-inflammatory, we went with the medical foods, and then immediately transitioned to carnivore after those 10 days.
Fantastic. What about desiccated organs?
Haven't done that with him. You know, he's got a little bit of a budget concern, and
Who
so
doesn't?
well, you or me, you know,
Well,
but
okay.
you know,
I'm big on liver, heart, and kidney. Across the board, it seems to be a great place to start.
yeah, I would agree.
Jeff asks, when Nandor says cold shower, how cold is he referring?
Well, it's still water, right? So it's above freezing, but not much. You know, as cold as you can do it. So, you know, if you've studied any from Wim Hof, you know, and the backstory on Wim Hof, I don't know if people know who Wim Hof is. You know, he became popular. His book was entitled The Way of the Iceman. And the backstory I actually found in a book called Breathe, which I highly recommend. I mean, I was so resistant to reading a book on breathing. I thought we all breathe, but I suddenly found out we all breathe wrong, you know, almost all of us. And I've improved my breathing. I tape my mouth shut at night. That's powerful. Our nasal passageways are the body's highest reserve of nitric oxide. And that's critical for heart, brain, immune system, sexual function. All that stuff is really, really important for health and longevity. And by the way, I do say sexual function because men who have the most sex live the longest. So we guys can take that prescription to our spouse or significant other, right? And say, you know, listen, if you want to keep me around, this is probably a good way to do it, right? But at any rate, so Wim Hof, his wife died, and he became profoundly depressed, and he went on a soul-searching mission to try to find himself and find the meaning of life. And he ended up studying with Tibetan monks, and they had something called fire breathing. And there were stories of these monks that would essentially get buck naked and lay in the snow, and they would breathe and melt all the snow around them, and steam would come off of them. And he said, come on, that can't be real. And as he practiced it and perfected it, he said, you know what, I just don't like cold or tolerate cold. I absolutely love cold. So here's a guy that swam for 2 hours in the Arctic Ocean wearing nothing but a Speedo, ran the Antarctic Marathon in no shirt and a pair of shorts, took 25 people, some of who were critically ill at the start of the journey, on a shirtless trek up Mount Kilimanjaro. And many of them had complete and total remission of their illnesses when they reached the top. So is there something to his methods? There absolutely is. Is there something to cold? There absolutely is. Now, how cold can you go? Well, you don't want to get a freezer burn on your skin. You know, we've got these little, they're called iCryo franchises. And I went in one, interestingly enough, and you basically get buck naked except for gloves and stockings. And you stand in a liquid nitrogen freezer, minus 270 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. It's only for 3 minutes. Now, what's so fascinating is, you know, I was in that freezer, and then I got out, and, you know, the guy immediately like put a thermometer on my quad and said, my gosh, your surface temperature dropped 46 degrees. Now, that was Fahrenheit. And I said, what's normal? He said, well, typically about 30. You know, but I was pretty lean at the time. I tend to stay that way. And he said, you know, you don't have any insulation. You're frozen. And, you know, yeah, so it probably took me, you know, a couple hours to warm up, literally where I felt warm again. But I'll tell you what, you burn at least 500 calories in that process and you get those beautiful benefits. So pretty powerful stuff. So as cold as you can tolerate, you know, but it's got to be liquid. So there's probably a way to mess with the atmospheric temperature where you could get water as a liquid below 0, but you might not want to do that.
Awesome. Is a cold shower or ice pack good for someone with heart disease?
With a caution, because too cold, too fast will cause a cardiovascular response. And I had this, interestingly enough, I had this conversation with a patient today. And, you know, in Wisconsin, there was that's where I grew up, Wisconsin, right? So it was in the north. And basically, people would either sit in a hot tub or sit in a sauna, then go jump in a snowbank. And that was pretty popular. And it's very, very interesting that when you're that hot, the initial cold doesn't feel as cold. But it's a cardiovascular stress. And, when that was popular, one of the football coaches, actually the head football coach at University of Wisconsin-Madison, a guy named Dave McLean, went from a sauna to a snowbank, had a massive heart attack, and died right there in the snowbank. So, let's put it this way. It's not for the weak at heart. So if you have cardiovascular vulnerability, get healthy first. And there's varying degrees of cold. So slightly below room temperature might be cold to start, and then you take it down from there. And maybe Nandor's idea of an ice pack on the chest would be an easier start. An ice pack on your chest for, 10 seconds, see how you do. Then 20, then 40, then 80, then 160 and 320. And, a couple more doublings and you got your 15 minutes.
Go ahead, Nandor.
Yes. So just very quickly, Dr. Bob, do you remember Artie? The lady Artie?
I think I do. Yeah, she had a nice car dealership in the Midwest, and I had a conversation with her about different products. Yes. Okay.
Yes. So she had AFib.
Okay.
So it's a cardiovascular problem just because the cardiovascular question, and they could not reset her heart. They tried for like 5 years, and I got her on desiccated heart, and boom, it literally happened overnight, and they couldn't believe it at the clinic. They didn't want to believe it. They said, well, if you feel it, then go off your drugs. And she did. And it remained in balance. So anybody out there with a cardiovascular question, very important, desiccated heart, or if you want it, heart from the butcher or heart from your farmer, grass-fed, grass-finished. Great stuff. Great stuff.
Great testimonial. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Seeing a handsome guy wearing some blue blockers there, set up for the evening. What's up, my friend Claudio?
Great information this evening. Nandor, great to see you on the call as well. I have a quick question for you. Placement for the ice packs, upper, lower, mid, whereabouts, and how long?
Well, so again, as Dr. Bob said, it could be as short as 10 seconds. So, if you can't handle it, it may not be for you. You work your way up. But I go left to right. And, the ice bag or the ice pack that we use is not ice. It's one of those things you put in the freezer.
Yep.
So within 15 minutes, it's melted anyways. It's no longer frozen. So, you work your way. But I think that's a good product to use across the chest.
Great. Awesome. Thank you very much, buddy. No pain, no gain.
Well, we don't, I guess, right. But as Dr. Bob said, we don't want anybody dropping dead from a cardiovascular episode. If it's too cold, you can only handle so much, go slow.
Right.
But it is amazingly enough, extremely effective.
Thank you, my friend. Great to see you on the call again. I'd like to introduce one of my business partners here, new business partners, Dana. Toddy's got a couple of questions and a testimonial as well. Dana, if you'd like to unmute yourself, please take it away.
Hi, everyone, and thank you. So I met Claudio in early June, and I did have a finger skin condition. Right now it's under control. As soon as I am not drinking the hot cocoa or the teas, it is coming back, but it is only mid-August. I don't know if I hold up these pictures, if anyone will be able to see it. The crazy part of it is, and kind of a laugh, I only get it on the middle finger of my right hand. So, kind of no one mess with me, or the middle finger's coming out. But it quite often will start like this, like a little blister of skin. And then it can quickly turn to this and be extremely, extremely, can you see that? Raw and very painful. Have no other ideas of what it is.
And what does it look like now?
Right now, it's in good shape. It's, again, I'm aware of it. It's, if I touched all my fingers, I know that's it because it's been so raw. I'd probably get it once a month. So I just can't run out of my hot cocoa or my teas. As soon as I do, I am getting it back, but I'm hopeful that the more I get it into me, the less I will see it, because of course I did reach out to medical and I wasn't really happy with the answers that I was suggested, like apply Vaseline and yeah. So
Well,
I
one
am
thing,
happy with the area it's going, and I've had it probably for about 1.5 years, and I just, deal with it as I was looking for the right answer.
well, I'm glad you found it. And it sounds like it was a delicious way to find it. What
Yeah.
I tell people is, I often get the question, what is functional medicine? And I often go to Dr. David Perlmutter, board certified neurologist and certified in clinical nutrition, one of the very few people that has that. He started studying functional medicine when his father was an absolute genius, also a neurologist, suffered severe dementia. He said, how could this happen with as much as my dad knew about the brain? But he was in the medical model, and most medical people never found a drug they didn't like, and they never found a person that didn't need drugs. And so the sad reality is that, clearly we don't need Vaseline on any part of our body to keep it healthy. We keep it healthy from the inside out. And you're just making a better choice. And if we start looking, did it change your microbiome? The bugs in your gut, which some people would suggest is one of the largest organs in our body. It absolutely does. Did it change your inflammatory process? It absolutely does. Did it alkalize you? It absolutely does. Did it modulate the immune system? It's proven to do that as well. And, what was the primary thing that made you better? Well, I don't know that we can ever answer that, but we're just happy that you are better. And I suggest or predict that if you stay on this path, you'll continue to improve. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Just give me 1 second, Nandor. I've got to get Kathy's question in here. Kathy asks, my son has to switch back and forth from day shift to graveyards every other week. Does this change in sleeping schedule? Sorry, does this change in sleeping schedules also cause issues?
Indisputably, yes. I mean, it is now, it should be outlawed. It really should be. And so we start looking at, what percentage of our genes are related to circadian rhythm. And now that they've done very sophisticated gene mapping, it's over 80%. And when you start looking at that, it means that our body wants a set schedule. So when you keep shifting your sleep schedule, it's like constantly being jet lagged. And it's not good for you in any way. So there's just no way that anybody who understands health would endorse that swing shift philosophy. And I almost can't believe that here we are in 2022 and businesses are still allowed to do it. It ought to be a punishable crime. So do whatever he can to get off of that swing shift.
Sorry, the lady who had the question about the middle finger.
Yeah.
She's still here. Dana's still here. Yes.
Still here.
Right. So the question is, it happens once a month. So, is it hormonal? And then, of course, the other thing is, are you doing an elimination diet of sorts? Because there's stuff, the thing, anything that happens to the body is, as Dr. Bob will tell you, is, we're feeding it. Right. So years ago, it was mono meals. And, these days it's carnivore. So because we all know that red meat, nobody's allergic to. So that skin irritation that you keep getting, I wonder if it's something you're eating. And then, of course, offsetting it with the wonderful Ganoderma.
Great point. And by the way, part of our strategy with everybody is an elimination diet. Now, this is the most extreme. And the data really supports it. Do you have to do it forever? No, let's get your system reset, get you balanced, get you healthy, get you happy, and make sure that middle finger is, for whatever you want except suffering. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Camilla asks, do you, Dr. Bob, have some information on the patients you've helped who are overweight and how many of them were traumatized in any way? She's seen a study of 67% of bariatric surgery patients had been traumatized in their lives. Trauma is stress, so I wonder any advice that can go with the stress reset and after the stress reset.
So they have something which is called the Adverse Childhood Events Study, the ACE study. And I thought that in that study, it was something like 90% of people who are morbidly obese have had some very significant trauma or abuse in their life. And so that, I'm not going to give myself any measure of expertise in dealing with the psychological trauma that's there. But there are people that have different programs. You have to find the right one for them. And so specifically, Dr. John DeMartini has something called the Breakthrough Program that he's created over 30 years. I first did John DeMartini's Breakthrough in the early 1990s in Houston, Texas, before he was world famous. And he claims to be able to walk people through. Sometimes it takes many, many hours. We have this universe that has universal laws, and one of the laws is the laws of polarity. And anything that ever happens, this will sound unbelievable, especially with the trauma that you've been through specifically, Camila, is that, with everything that's bad, there's an equal opposite good. And with everything that's good, there's an equal and opposite bad. And that would be the law of polarity. And amazingly, John DeMartini helps people find the good. So probably, I would estimate that most people have heard of this circumstance called post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's very significant. Someone has a stressor and it beats them up for maybe their entire life. But the opposite of post-traumatic stress is post-traumatic growth. And interestingly enough, there's plenty of people that have that experience as well. And I think what DeMartini does, Dr. DeMartini, helps people go from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth. But, those types of wounds that wound our psyche, wound our soul, wound our spirit, you need a way that honors you to get around that and past it. Because we just can't let that destroy our existence. We're going to wrap it up with a thought, but Sadhguru is a sage of wisdom. Some of his YouTube videos have 10 million views. And, he quotes the Buddhist philosophy, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And he says, what are most people suffering? They're not suffering in the present moment. They're either suffering memories of the past, or they're imagining worse in the future. So most of our suffering is due to poor management of memories or poor use of imaginations. And what Sadhguru would tell you to do is, well, just stop that. Well, I don't know how easy that is for most people, but I like the philosophy. And if you find the right person for you, and what John DeMartini is going to tell you is that it doesn't take 20 years of therapy to get over it. It takes a day with the right person down the right path. And he's got decades of helping tens of thousands of people through that process. So I recommend it. I recommend his breakthrough course. Myself, I feel very blessed that, the amount of trauma in my life has been, minimal compared to what some people have been through. And I feel blessed in that respect. But you know what? When I get knocked off a center, one of my favorite things to do is count my blessings. And the best way to get happy is to give happy. So maybe that'll be the marching orders on this evening as we wrap up. So here's what I'm going to say. Nandor, so good to see you. You're a sage of wisdom, a beautiful soul, a great human. And so good to see all of you on here as well. If you know anybody that can benefit from the information, send them to us. We do this every week, and we also have replays. So with that said, good night all, and God bless.